Hello and welcome, Dr. Rasmussen, Chapter 11, the language chapter, and I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk to you about what is language, universality of language, and how language is learned. Not going to take too long, but this is kind of an introductory to language. Okay, so what is language? Do these, do we see language here? Do these organisms have language? Well, hopefully this individual who's wearing a beard of bees and like a tank top of bees, which is interesting. Hopefully she has language. She's saying, "Get these the hell off of me." But do the bees have language? Well, that's debatable. Bees are interesting. They can describe distance. They can describe orientation. They can describe as well um, like the height of an object, like how far away various factors are for their group mates, and they do this via a dance. Researchers don't necessarily believe it's language. We'll talk about this in a little bit. How about this guy? Is this guy trying to say something? Well, again, we don't know. Polar bear, not too sure. But they obviously have some sort of communication. Is it a language? Well, that's going to be debatable. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. How about this cute little guy? This is Nim Chimpsky. All right, his name was Nim, and Chimpsky. We'll talk about this. Will become more apparent why it's kind of funny in a little bit. But really cute little guy who was a research project trying to see what chimpanzees can learn via language by being raised in, like, as a child, as in a house. And so here he is, just chilling with his research assistant, essentially his aide, and this aide, amongst others, tried to teach him many different words. They succeeded only to about 130 some words. There's actually a lot of information on Nim, but a lot of people said, oh, he was so cute and everything, and oh, it was so awesome. But apparently, didn't have a great life. He died kind of early. He only lived to be 27 years of age, which is not that old in respect to um, well, maybe not even 27, just a little bit under 27. 27 years of age, that's under the average. So for chimpanzees, I think the average in captivity is around 40 to some years. The research project stopped after he attacked. Unfortunately, one of his assistants who was trying to help him teach him language. But there's documentaries, there's NPR blog posts, and recordings of his handlers on there. So kind of cool stuff to look at. But here's another picture of him, and he was basically taught American Sign Language. And again, he could learn about 130 words. The reason that sign language is used is because the vocal system in a chimpanzee is not as well developed as it is in humans. So in humans, our voice box is arranged differently than a chimpanzee's, so therefore we have the ability to speak more than them. However, we also have the unfortunate ability to choke on food more than other organisms. Another thing is the tongue. Our tongue is a lot more flexible and able to produce sounds. The same with our jaw. Their jaws and their tongue and their whole larynx and voice box and everything is not as well developed as humans. So it's going to be impossible for cute little Nim, as well as other chimpanzees, non-human primates, to be able to enunciate and articulate the same way that humans can. So that's why this researcher is teaching little Nim with American Sign Language. All right, so what are some aspects? We just looked at some organisms and brought up the question. So what are some aspects that might be important to language? Well, here are a few. Okay, so basically, one note is that you can achieve nearly infinite number of utterances with a language. So really, I mean, you can go on and on and on and on and on and continue going and writing and creating new words. Sorry, not new words, new sentences, I wanted to say, based on these words that you have. Now, of course, it's probably going to be, if you have a finite number of words, there's not going to be an infinite number of utterances, but you can nearly keep going on and on and on to create a new and novel and all different types of utterances with language. This is one aspect that researchers have noted. Another thing is it's hierarchical. Basically, you can add words on to a sentence. Okay, you can add on words in sentences, so you can continue on words with a sentence. So this might be another factor that is also unique to a language. It's also governed by rules. Okay, a language definitely is governed by rules. So if I say hello, how are you, that makes sense. But if I just take those same words and I just say you, hello, how are, you might know what I mean, but it's possible that you will not. Are, how, hello, you. Are, how, you, hello. What the heck does that mean? Hello, how are you? You're like, boom, I immediately know what that is. Okay? And that's just a simple sentence. So, yeah, there are particular rules that you've learned in English class, and those do apply to a language, and that helps make what we have, Homo sapiens have, a language. Okay, some of these aspects might be important amongst others. So now, is language universal? Well, it may actually appear kind of so. So in deaf infants, infants who are born deaf, these deaf infants seem to try to create some sort of sign language. Okay, um, deaf infants can move their bodies around to try to communicate. But the most interesting thing that I really want to talk about here is that they actually do seem to produce verbalizations as well, even though they're not hearing themselves. So they do seem to produce verbalizations even though they can't hear themselves. There's also more than 5,000 plus unique languages in the world. Okay, that's a lot. So this is basically suggesting that, yeah, language might be universal, but it's not one common language that seems to be universal. Look at even just New Guinea. New Guinea has been isolated for thousands of years, okay, before recently. And researchers have found that there are over 750 unique languages just in New Guinea. So these people have never experienced, many of these cultures have never experienced, this westernized or even easternized, propaganda or just culture. And they've still developed language. So this starts to beg the question, well, if it's not universal, then why did they start speaking? And it looks to be potentially universal because every Homo sapien culture, every human culture has a language. There has not been one that has been found to not have a language. There's also universal language development in respect to the utterances that infants make from both the projecting of sounds, just crying, hiccuping, potentially laughing, yelling, screaming, like crying type thing, to this babbling, to even further, just repeating, maybe the same syllables over, kind of like babbling, as well as producing sounds in respect to the actual language itself, the utterances sounding like an actual, like the actual language to producing words, seems to be in a universal aspect, as well as different words across languages, but these utterances have similar meaning, and there can even be similar structure. Now, some, like American, you speak American? English and I was going to say Mexican. Oh my gosh, what am I doing? Am I even educated here? So English and Spanish, while they're similar, they're also different in structure. However, you look at some of the word meanings like casa and house, those are two different words, but they mean the same thing. So there may be some universality in that there's different structure, even though there could be a little bit similar structure. And, the words obviously are different, but they mean the same thing. Okay, so let's get into how language is learned. So here's two big juggernauts in the day back in the 60s and 70s. We have B.F. Skinner on the left and Noam Chomsky on the right. Now, it's not Chomsky, even though that's how I might be saying it. Chomsky. Both were big proponents of language and how language is learned. B.F. Skinner was a behaviorist. Noam Chomsky was a cognitivist. Okay, so behaviorist, these individuals believed in, if you remember back to chapter 1, that everything is learned via some sort of reinforcement or some sort of pairing of stimuli through some sort of experience. Now, Noam Chomsky, experience is important, but there's also reason to learn. People may have motivation. there's more of a deliberate thought process involved than just operant conditioning and classical conditioning. So basically, what B.F. Skinner said is that language is learned through reinforcement. Children get reinforcement when they learn words, and so therefore they're going to continue learning words. Okay, so that is basically how people learn language. Now, I know it's interesting, right? Like, how did the first people learn language? Who did they get reinforcement from, right? Kind of interesting to think about if you go back all the way, or at least to the distant ancestors of Homo sapiens and so on and so forth. Now, Noam Chomsky, on the other hand, he believed that language is natural. Language is innate. Okay, that we have a capacity to learn language because it is something that our ancestors evolved with. So let's go a little bit further. So basically, he posed this massive question to B.F. Skinner: how do babies generate a novel sentence? Okay, some sort of novel utterance. And so, if they can do this with no formal experience, well then they're likely creating this in their head, and they have some sort of way of creating this in their head. So here's an example that he used: "I hate you, mommy." Okay, so a little child says, "I hate you, mommy." They probably never heard that word before, or that word string before, that sentence. But these little children can still create this sentence. Possibly, why? Well, because they have some sort of what's known, he called it as some sort of language acquisition device. Some sort of device that allows an individual to comprehend naturally languages, spoken word, as well as put together sentences, put together word meaning naturally, okay, through experience, obviously. And so the language acquisition device, the LAD, the LAD, is a hypothetical model of the human mind that is posited to account for children's innate predisposition for language acquisition. And you may know this, children can pick up language almost like a sponge. They don't have to consciously, they're obviously conscious in the moment when they're learning a language, but they don't have to learn a language like you and I, who are in I'm in my 30s. You might be in your late teens, 20s, 30s, wherever, 40s and 50s, so on and so forth. But most of you have probably gotten to a point where language is much harder to learn than when you were at an earlier age. And so the reason why is possibly, we've gone past that critical or that sensitive period where if you go past it and you don't learn a new language, it becomes harder. Researchers don't necessarily know why, but there's reasons posited for it. Maybe it's neuroplasticity. Anyhow, children seem to be predisposed to coming into this world to picking up language, and that could be because of some sort of language acquisition device, as he noted. Okay, so it definitely seems as though Noam Chomsky did win out. The behaviorist movement definitely took some major hits from Noam Chomsky, as well as other researchers who really started to put the dagger into behaviorism in a nutshell. Behaviorism definitely is a solid way to explain some behavior. However, can it explain all behavior? Definitely not. There are other processes that are taking place, more than likely cognitive processes that are certainly taking place, is what researchers have found. And that, my friends, is why you are taking this class. Okay, so basically, or because you're here for me, Dr. Rasmussen, or for credit, or because there's no other classes that you could take. Who knows? Okay, I'm done. I don't want to re-record this, so I'm just going to shut up. You could think about this as a way of a recap. What is language? We talked about it. Homo sapiens definitely have language. Other organisms, probably not. Even our closest compadre, the chimpanzees, only can get to about 130 words. Possibly a little bit more depending on the species, but overall, not too many. Universality, yes, it definitely seems that language development is universal amongst people, as well as how language is learned. It's probably not from a behavioral aspect, even though behavior, reinforcement definitely will help, but it seems to be something that's innate, possibly by what Noam Chomsky said, the language acquisition device. There are these particular areas within our brain, possibly something like Broca's area, Wernicke's area, where language is processed, and there you have it. Thank you very much for tuning in. You have a great one.